This morning, what we're looking at this morning, it may seem a little sad. I want to warn you up front. It may seem a little sad when we're starting off because we're talking about the past, we're talking about loss, we're talking about regrets. But what we're really talking about is how to transcend those. How do we as human beings move beyond the pain and the suffering of our loss? How do we move beyond the resentment and the regrets that we have for the past? And how do we continue to move on to not ignore those things, not pretend that they didn't happen, not constantly relive those things by staying stuck in the consciousness of them, but to actually transcend them, to move beyond them, to take that irritation, if you will, the irritation of the grain of sand inside the oyster is what makes the pearl. So you could metaphorically say that the oyster has transcended the irritation, the regrets, the sadness, the pain, and it has turned them into a pearl. How do we take those things about our own past, about our nation's past, about the world's past? How do we take those things that irritate us, that upset us, that make us feel sad, and how do we move forward? So that's where we're going today. Now, this weekend is the weekend that our nation observes what is called Memorial Day. It started out as Decoration Day. It started out as different days. It started out officially in our country after the end of the Civil War. Now mind you, the tradition of tending to the graves of the deceased and the deceased warriors, the soldiers, has gone back for centuries, for millennium. It's not anything that we invented here in the United States of America in the 1860s. But it became an official observance in the 1860s. If you try to go back and find the origins of it, you will find that there are many different stories about what community originated the tradition. And I have no doubt that they all probably did, that it was going on for long before it was official, because it is something that people naturally did. And that is to go out in the springtime when the flowers are most plentiful, and to go out and to tend to the graves, to go out and to tidy up the graves, to remove the debris that may have fallen on them over the winter, to tidy them up and to put fresh flowers on them. You may recall in some cultures they have what they call Tomb Sweeping Day. So cultures for quite some time have had different observances about how they go out and how they remember the dead. So the spring, when the flowers are most abundant in our part of the world, that is when Decoration Day came to be. And people would go out and they would collect and pick fresh flowers, and they would go and they would put them on the graves of the fallen soldiers. And it became an official observance. I believe, the history of the United States government traces it to 1868, but it was going on before that. And one thing that caught me about the observance when I started to kind of research, I wanted to see where the origins were, as we were talking about this morning, is one story that was related was that after the Civil War, some ladies in a southern town where there had been a battle, they went out to tend to the graves of their fallen, of their soldiers, their loved ones, their husbands, their sons, their brothers. And as they were tending to those graves, they noticed that there were Union soldiers, the enemy, their enemy, in that war, who were buried in the same cemetery. And there was nobody there to tend to their graves. These young men were killed far away from home, and their loved ones could not get down there to take care of them, if they even knew where they were buried. So these ladies, in their compassion, went over and started to spruce up the graves of the Union soldiers. And what that meant to me, what I got out of that as I started to read it is that we are all human beings, each and every one of us, our friends, our family, and even our enemies. We are all human beings, and perhaps in our suffering, we relate to each other better as humans than we do in the good times, than we do in the times of war. You know, when we go to war with another people, we have to demonize them in order to be able to go fight them. We have to find ways to justify why they are evil and we are not. So when we are fighting the enemy, we are not fighting somebody just like ourselves. We are fighting somebody who we have demonized. But in our suffering, when it comes to our suffering, when it comes to our loss, then we start to become human. This is why when there's a tragedy somewhere in the world, an earthquake or natural disaster of some sort, there's an outpicturing. There's an outpicturing of consolation that people all over the world, people from every political ideology and people of every religion, they want to reach out to one another to be part of helping in some way. They want to reach out. So I say that because we want to understand that we are all one, that we are all connected, that we all come from the same source, that we all come from the same God. And if we can learn to feel that love, if we can learn to experience that love, then perhaps we can transcend the hate. Perhaps we can transcend the very reason for war in the first place. So when we look at this day and we look at the graves, you see the pictures of Arlington on the news, and you see the pictures of wherever you are. There's got to be a military cemetery somewhere. And they have school children going out and putting flowers and American flags on the graves. And I can't help when I see that but to feel sad, to feel a certain sadness for the loss that is there. Most of these soldiers, sailors, Marines, military people, they were very young. You know, World War II, the age of some of the flight crews that flew the B-17s, the average age was 21 of the 10 people on the crew. These were just boys. And they were cut down in the prime of their life. And not only were they cut down, but there's somebody who grieved them. Parents, siblings, spouses, children perhaps. So there's this tremendous sense of sadness that I feel when I start to look at this, and I start to feel connected to all of the humans everywhere, on any side, on every side, for the loss that people experience when we as human beings do inhuman things to one another. So we have these events go on, and the older you get, the more reach you have back into history, the more experience you have, and you can start to look back. And what we know now, you know, looking back in time, is that at times that we have asked these people to go off and to do the things that they needed to do and to make the sacrifices that they made, that at times when we did that, we really, our government didn't have enough information or didn't tell us what they knew, or, as in the case of Vietnam, fabricated information. Gulf of Tonkin papers and Daniel Ellsberg is what I'm referring to. In order to put our troops in harm's way. And it just kind of increases the sadness, if you will. we look at this and say, oh my God, how terrible is this? Humanity has been at war since all of recorded history. Some of the earliest recorded history is about battle. It seems that this will never end. It seems that we are just doomed to go on killing each other forever and forever and forever. And how and when is there anything that we can do in order to stop this nonsense, this madness? And this is what I'm talking about, transcending. It's okay to feel the sadness. It's okay to feel the regret. It's okay to feel bad about the fact that we may have even been in favor of something that with hindsight we are no longer in favor of. We have different information. We have more information now. Perhaps our views have changed. But how do we deal with that? What do we do about that? Can we walk around being sad all the time? How do we transcend it? How do we take that grain of sand and how do we turn it into a pearl? And if you look at the way society does it, it's interesting to me because society, I believe, tends to ignore it, tries to look the other way. Decoration Day was a separate holiday. It was May the 30th. It wasn't a Monday until the 1970s. It changed its name from Decoration Day to Memorial Day. There used to be separate Union and Confederate Decoration Days. They finally decided that we're one country again and we're going to have one day. But in that one day, we're going to honor all of the war dead, not just one side or the other. When I was helping Brian with the documentary on the German U-boat, that was the first German U-boat sunk by the United States Navy, was right off the coast of Carolina, and the American destroyer that sank it recovered bodies from the water and took them back to Norfolk, Virginia, and in a small cemetery, in a national cemetery in Norfolk, Virginia, there are German sailors buried there. And every year the German government comes and the United States government comes as well, and they have a joint ceremony where they honor those sailors, even though they were our enemy, even though we were all trying to kill one another. They have decided that they're going to come and they're going to honor the sacrifice that these men made for their country. So we had a separate holiday. We had a Decoration Day. We had a time when this observance was about remembering the dead and remembering the sacrifices they made and remembering the losses that their families endured and taking time to reflect upon that. And then in the 70s, we turned it into a 3-day weekend. We made it a holiday. And now if you look at your friend's Facebook posting, it says, have fun on your Memorial Day weekend. It's the beginning of the summer. You know, it's time to get the jet ski out of the garage. It's time to put a coat of paint on the bottom of your sailboat. It's time to get the old barbecue fired up and start to grill and watch the Indianapolis race on TV and have a few cold beers and to celebrate. And it's as if we have kind of looked away from the original purpose, that the sadness was too great for us to bear. I mean, if you stop and think about it, it'll bring you down. The sadness is too great to bear, so what we did was we just kind of look at it and then look away. And we pretend it's not there. We can even justify it, you know, well, those people who fought and died and gave their life, they would have wanted us to celebrate. They died so we could be free. So let's just focus on the being free part. Let's not focus on the sadness part. And that's normal, that's natural, that's what we as human beings do, you know. No matter how bad things are, we try to turn away from them. We try to find something else, you know. I remember as a small child going to the wakes of aunts and great aunts and family members who had passed away, and it was always a great time for learning new jokes. because that's the way that people looked away from the loss. That's the way that they looked away from the sadness. They remembered only the good. They remember the good times, and they would tell funny stories, and they would tell jokes, and they would tell the favorite joke of the person who had passed. And we do that to divert our attention. Now, what happens when we do that is we have not neutralized, or we have not transcended the sadness, the regrets, the pain. We haven't done anything with it. It's still there, and we're still dragging it around. And I realize that it's Memorial Day, and we're talking about the loss of young people in battle. But each of us has many other things in our past, many other regrets, many other resentments, many other reasons for being sad. And it's the same issue with that. We try to take those things in our past that we really don't want to wrestle with and deal with. You know, none of us feels capable of single-handedly stopping war, so why bother? Why try? We don't feel capable of doing anything about what happened in the past, so we stuff it down. We stuff it down. We stuff it down. And of course that doesn't work. It's still with us, right? It's done unto us according to our belief, our conscious belief and our subconscious belief. We are each carrying around memories of the past. We are each in contact with what Dr. Holmes called race consciousness, what Carl Jung called the collective unconsciousness, but we are carrying around and in touch with the memories of the entire human race. Not just the people who are alive today, but those who have ever lived. We have our own memories, not from just this lifetime, but from wherever we were before we got here. So we have all of this stuff in the past, and that stuff is affecting us today. Right? Because the law is operating through our belief, and our belief is in many cases formed by our past. So Dr. Holmes tells us we can see this from time to time. We can look at the way we react and we respond and we deal with an issue at hand today. And we look at it and say, that's interesting. Why did I respond that way? Why did I react that way? Why did I do or say the things I did or said? And it's because there's something back in the past, something in a memory. We reacted and responded not according to the situation in front of us, but according to the way our memory told us we needed to react and to respond to that situation. Dr. Holmes goes on to tell us, you know, that psychiatrists will tell us that we continue to repeat old patterns of behavior until something is done to break the pattern. And that's what I'm talking about, breaking the pattern, transcending the pattern. Not only just letting it go, ignoring it. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about doing something to change it into a positive direction, doing something to use that energy that is there, using that energy to propel us in the direction we want to go instead of leaving us stuck in a place where we don't want to be stuck. So if we try to ignore it, if we try to pretend it's not there, we may create the illusion to ourselves that the sadness is not there, that the realization of a wrong is not there, but it is. It is there, and we carry it with us. And as we grow, eventually we come to a place in our life where we learn that we have to make peace with the past. We have to transcend it. We have to move forward. So in addition to ignoring or trying to ignore the past, what we try to do, another coping strategy that we come up with is we cling to it. We relive it over and over and over again. We stay stuck in it. You know, every time there's a family reunion, every time there's a high school reunion, you'll go and there's same people getting together and reliving the same stories over and over and over again, as if nothing had changed. I knew a man once who went back to, I guess it was his 25th high school reunion, and he said he went into the bar that they used to hang out in after they graduated high school. When they started working, there was a little bar in town where the friends would go after work. And he said he walked into that bar 25 years after he had left, or perhaps a little bit more or a little bit less. And there were the same people sitting on the same stool telling the same stories that they were telling when he left 25 years ago. And people tend to do that. We tend to stay stuck. We tend to stay in those circumstances. We tend to stay fixated on them. Somebody has done us wrong, and we feel that there's no way in the world that we can move on with our life because they've done something to us wrong. And we want them to come and to apologize to us, but they won't, because either they can't or they don't think they did anything wrong. They didn't see it the way that we did. And we stay stuck in our resentment. We stay stuck in living from that place of, I can't have the life that I want to have because of what this other person did or said, or the way they treated me. And if only I had had an opportunity to go to a different school, or whatever. We just go on and we go on and we go on. And what happens is, because we are stuck there in consciousness, and because there is a power that responds to us according to our belief that is working through our consciousness, we continue to create. We continue to recreate. We continue to relive the essence of those experiences. In other words, we're doing it to ourselves over and over and over. It's like Bill Murray in the movie Groundhog Day, over and over and over. You see this, excuse me, you know what I'm talking about. People who leave one marriage and go into another marriage only to find out that the new spouse is uncannily like the old one. We quit a job and go to a new job in a new city just to find out that the boss there and the coworkers there are too much like the people we left behind. And what we're doing is we are attracting into our lives the conditions and the peoples that outpicture our consciousness, that let us relive over and over and over again that which we are stuck in. So ignoring it doesn't work, and holding on to it and reliving it doesn't work. And we come to, well, what's left? Well, what's left? Right? And everybody loves the quote, it takes a different level of consciousness to solve the problem than the one that created it. Excuse me. We have to transcend. We have to move ourselves to a different level of thinking and believing. Now, a lot of times when we get into this and we start to talk about it, people will say, well, do I have to go back in the past and dredge up everything that happened and relive everything that happened, and somehow that is going to take the sting out of it? And the answer is no, we don't have to do that. Some schools of psychology and psychiatry may ask their people to do that. But we don't have to do that. Dredging up the past and looking at it again doesn't do anything but let us look at it again. We have to change. We have to change the way we think about it. We have to change the way we feel about it. We have to change the level of consciousness that we had at the time that we went through that experience. Excuse me, let me get a drink of water. We must transcend it. Now, Dr. Holmes tells us we can look at the conditions in our life, and if we find something that appears to be a pattern and appears to be a strange pattern, if you will, we responded in a manner that we don't understand, we can be sure that there's something in our past that is outpicturing itself, something in our belief that is outpicturing itself. But we don't have to know what it is. We just have to know what we want. We just want to know how we wanted to react, how we wanted to respond. And we need to use the power of spiritual practice, of affirmative prayer, of treatment, in order to create the new conditions in our consciousness, which creates the new conditions in our experience. And secondly, it dissolves whatever there was in consciousness that was the root cause. It lets it go. Holmes tells us that when we enter the room and the room is dark, we don't have to know who turned out the lights. We don't have to know how long the lights were turned out. We don't have to know the wattage of the bulbs. All we have to do is turn on the switch. And the instant we turn on the switch, the instant we bring light into the darkness dissipates. The darkness was never an entity of its own. It had no power to sustain itself. There was not a struggle when you turned on a light switch. There was not a war between light and dark, and light finally won, right? The dark didn't scream and try to get out through the windows or under the doors. The darkness only appeared to be there because the light had been restricted. And the instant we bring light into that restricted area, that which appeared as darkness is gone. We have ideas in consciousness that we developed on our own, that we have assimilated from those around us, that we have absorbed from race consciousness. And these ideas are not true. These ideas are ideas of separation. Dr. Holmes tells us in the final analysis, all of our problems are rooted in ideas of separation. Wars are rooted in ideas of separation. And that what the world needs now more than anything are individuals who are willing to dissolve those ideas of separation. So if we look back, if there is something that comes to mind, something about our past experience, something that we know brings us sadness, a memory that we have, what we can do is we can find the truth that is the opposite of that which is causing us sadness. Are we sad because we believe in loss? Well, then we can work with the idea that there's no loss in the mind of God. Nothing has ever been lost in the mind of God. There's just as much of God now as there ever was and there ever will be. Things change form. They change the form that they express through, but nothing can be lost in the mind of God. If we think that we missed out on love because we have lost a loved one, we can work with the idea that love is a principle, not a person. That we can experience that love that we felt we missed out on. We can experience a deep love in many different ways with many different people. And if we wish to experience love, we must give the love we wish to experience. Emerson said, if you want to have a friend, you must be a friend. Jesus said, cast your bread upon the waters and it shall return unto you. Florence Scovel Shinn said, life's a game of boomerangs. What you toss out, you're going to get back. If we think about how this is going to happen, how this change is going to occur, what we must remember is that we are dealing with a power that is immutable, that is omnipotence. There is nothing too difficult for the mind of God. And Dr. Holmes brings us back to this when he's talking about war. It's very easy for us to say, well, wars always have been, wars always will be. We have to go to war because other people are not like we are. We have to defend ourselves and all of these other ideas of separation. But that's not the truth. That's the appearance. That's the way it seems to be. That's the way it is because it is an agreement that human consciousness has made. But divine consciousness knows none of it. Divine consciousness knows how to express itself as love, how to express itself as unity, how to express itself as oneness, as peace. We take ourselves to the idea that God has never been at war with itself. It could not be. It would have destroyed itself, and there would be nothing. And God has nothing to be at war with because God is everything. It has created everything out of itself. It is omnipotence. What does it have to fight against that could stand up to it? It is omniscience. It knows all that there is to know. So we have to bring ourselves to the point of realizing that principle, the law, the way that God works, principle is never bound by precedent. Never bound by precedent. See, in our human way of thinking and living, we look into the future and we project the future as a continuation of the past. Well, this is the way it happened 10 years ago, and this is the way it happened 5 years ago, and this is the way it happened 2 years ago. And when we get to that again, it's going to happen that way again. It must be because that's the way it keeps happening. Right? That's the human condition, and that's why sometimes we're afraid of the future. We think the future is going to be like the past. It may not be so much that the future is unknown. We could probably deal with the unknown, but we're afraid it's going to be like the past. So we're taking the regrets of the past and we're turning them into the anxiety of the future. And what we have to remember is that the divine is only here and now. And we are only here and now in consciousness. And we can't go back in the past and change anything. We can't change anything that's already happened. It's done. It's gone. But we have to change the way that we think and feel about it, or it will continue to affect us. We will continue to outpicture it. We will continue to fear the future because it is a ghostly image of the past. So what we want to do is to remember that principle is never bound by precedent. It doesn't matter how many people tell us that we must have war. It doesn't matter how many people tell us that we can never overcome the difficulties of our own past. It doesn't matter how long we have been telling ourselves that we can't live the full and the complete and the happy life that we want to live because of where we were when. And what we want to remember is that right here and right now, in this moment, we are creating our tomorrow. I'm trying to remember the quote by Raymond Charles Barker. The future is the process of the now becoming through our consciousness, or something of that nature is the way Dr. Barker put it. What are we thinking about now? What are we believing in our hearts now? What is it that we tell ourselves when we get out of bed in the morning? What is it that we do in our spiritual practice? Are we just living life, going through it? pretending that there's nothing in the past that can affect us, there's nothing we can do about it anyway, and the future is what it's going to be, so there's no sense worrying? Or are we deliberately choosing? Are we deliberately choosing to transcend? Are we deliberately choosing to be happy, to be healthy, to be fulfilled? Are we deliberately choosing to be peacemakers? To be peacemakers so that this thing called war comes to an end. So that we don't have to ask young people to give up their lives. We don't have to ask mothers to send their children off to war. But that we become, you and I, we become, and we are the only ones we can work with. You know, sometimes we get into this and we say, well, how are we going to change the whole world? You're going to change the whole world by starting right where you are. Right where you are. Once you have changed yourself, then you can worry about the rest of the world. Once you've put that oxygen mask on yourself, then you turn and you have something to do to put it on another. Once you have taken the plank out of your own eye, then you can turn your attention to the splinter in your neighbor's. And we start right where we are by refusing to believe that just because it's always been a certain way, it must always be that way in the future. We awaken in the morning and recognize that we are spiritual beings here on this earth. And that spirit is not held hostage by matter. That spirit is the author of matter. And what I mean by that is that the conditions in the world around us do not limit spirit in any way. But if we can recognize the omnipotence, the omniscience as omnipresence, and we can connect with it, that the circumstances in the world about us will change. And we connect with it in the only place that we can, in our own consciousness. We connect with it through our spiritual practice. We connect with it by deciding this day that we are an instrument of God's peace, an instrument of God's love, an instrument of God's goodness. We decide that the omniscience of the universe is right this instant, revealing to us and to all who are crying out for a greater experience of life, how to transcend the limiting ideas of the past. We trust that divine love guides us to let go of what we need to let go of, and is doing the same for each and every person. We declare the good that we would have rather than focusing on the lack, the limitation, the restriction that we had. We focus on the peace that we would have rather than the wars that we had in the past. Each of us, each and every one of us, is an expression of and an instrument of that eternal life, which is God. We have the ability to release and to let go of every limitation from the past. We have the ability to accept into our consciousness and therefore into our experience all of the good that we can envision. We have the ability to envision a greater contact with God, a greater experience of God in our lives, in our world, in our country. And that ability transcends time and space and human mortality. So as we come together this day of reflecting on the past, even though it may bring some sadness, we can use that to propel us forward. We can use that as motivation to do our spiritual growth with a little bit more sincerity, perhaps, with a little bit more time. Perhaps with a little bit more of a sense of urgency. That unless and until human consciousness changes, we will be putting flowers on graves of fallen soldiers forever and forever until perhaps we destroy the world. So I invite us then, let's step out of that consciousness. Let's step out of that madness. Let's step out of this idea that we can do no better as a human race because that is the way it has always been. And let's step into the idea that as a spiritual race we can. Because with God, all things are possible. So this weekend, as we have some extra time off, in addition to doing all of the things that are good and that are fun, let's take a little bit of time to do the most important thing that we can do for peace. Let us recognize that war is not necessary. War is only the outpicturing of human ideas of stubbornness and separation. Let us recognize that there's a greater truth of unity which we know is love. This is why you're told to pray, loving your enemies, blessing them, doing good for those who would harm you. To see even those who would be our enemies, to see them as human beings with mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers. To recognize that the love of God is right where each and every person is. And it is through this love, through this unity, this experience of oneness, it is through this love that peace makes its way. Human beings have been at war for thousands of years. And the great teachers who have come along have told us essentially the same thing. If we wish to end war, we must love one another. That's it. Jesus told us. Buddha told us. We must love one another. I invite you this week to make yourself a better instrument of God's love. The love is already there. It is waiting to shine through you. It is just waiting for you to declare it to be so. So let's make it so. And so it is.